Hi and welcome to the first tasting video. We hope this will be one of many in a string of videos that help you taste along with me once you've got your sample box, or you might just want to watch them for interest. In them we'll talk about the different flavours you might get from the whiskies that we suggest to you, but of course everything's personal taste. You might get none of them, you might get all of them, or you might get something in between. There's no wrong answers in tasting whiskey. Here are just my thoughts and we'll see if you agree. We'll kick it straight off with Ben Romach's Sassicaia Wood. Now Sassicaia is a vineyard in Tuscany that makes two types of wine, and Ben Romach chose to finish their whiskey in those barrels they sourced from this vineyard. As you'd expect, on the nose that means there's lots of red wine smell. If you haven't had Sassicaia wine before, you might just get red wine. That's fine too, of course. But through the red wine, there's some lighter caramel toffee notes, that kind of vanilla that comes through often with whiskies, and as we taste throughout the sample packs, there'll be a lot of vanilla that comes through on the nose. There's a small amount of the oak that's from the barrel that's actually just beating down that red wine that's so prominent. On the palate, very much the red wine. Sometimes with whiskey, as we'll see as we go, there are whiskies that marry together flavours so that they work together as almost becoming a new flavour. In this sense, Ben Romach have aimed for the Sassicaia red wine element and the whiskey are almost separate things happening at the same time. So you get that slightly different taste in different parts of your mouth from both. But the red wine's definitely there, and that caramel's developed into more a nutty, toffee, almost an almond or something going on in the background. Very nice, and not a particularly long finish. It's pretty much gone after you take a sip and wait a few seconds, but when it's in your mouth it's certainly very different, very complicated, lots of flavours going on. We'll move straight along. This is the Nikka's Taketsuru 12-year-old. It's a pure malt, which means it's not a single malt. It's a combination of various malt whiskies though, not grain whiskies or other fillers that you'll get in what's called just, say, a blend. But they've in a blended malt, what you can achieve is you can get lots and lots of different flavours because you're sourcing the different base whiskies from different places. This one's named after the founder of the Nikka distillery. Taketsuru travelled to various parts of Europe as well as Japan, where he was from, to learn about whiskey manufacture. On the nose, you get a great deal of the kinds of things he might have experienced along the way. Lots of florals, those grassy hay notes that come through, and that wet dew kind of smell that you get from the countryside, which he'd be experiencing, or would have experienced, in Japan and places like Scotland, Ireland. And they develop on the palate very much. There's a lot of that grass is still there. It's developing a little bit into some more sort of overripe fruits, more like an orchard kind of fruit that you might find, or the smell and the taste of fruit that you'd find overripe dropping off trees in orchards. A bit of apple, green apple, and also some stone fruits, a bit of apricot as well. Before I took that sip, it's a longer finish than the first, which is part of what we try to achieve. It's not particularly long, but on the finish, those fruits really hang around, and some of that sort of hay and grass and just more woody element of vegetation drops off, and you really get some of those stone fruits coming through, certainly. Very good. Move on. The Macallan Select Oak Reserve. If you've heard about whiskey, you've probably heard about Macallan. It's one of the most famous, it's one of the oldest, certainly, and they've been making very good whiskey for a long time. But it's just up to you to decide whether you think that the whiskey they make is worth the quite high price tag compared to other distilleries. We've opted for the Select Oak Reserve. It's not part of their normal series, or what you'd call their entry varieties that they're running with at the moment. They've got a colour series. So they've gone back to what the colour of the whiskey looks like after it's been in different woods: amber, sienna, ruby, etc. This is the Select Oak Reserve because their main focus is what the actual wood does to the flavour of the whiskey. So as you'd expect, on the nose, there's a lot of oak. They'd be using different oaks in this variety. Certainly, they might have had the same base spirit in them to start with, or base alcohol, but the oaks themselves will be different to create this interesting blend of oak flavour. On the palate, the oak is certainly still there, but what that was repressing on the nose slightly, the more fruity flavours that are behind it, and a little bit of that char and smokiness is coming through on the palate. The reason for that would be that when you cooper the barrels to create your final barrel to put your new make whiskey spirit in, you have to char it. And that's what that slight smokiness is will be coming through there. Different to peat and the smoke you'll get from the production of the spirit itself, this will be coming from the woods, and that would be a deliberate move by Macallan. Finish is very pleasant. It's long, but it's not heavy. It sticks around, but it certainly drops off. The oak actually drops off first and leaves some of that more malty flavour hanging around for the finish. As I say, Macallan, very good. We've obviously opted for it for this tasting pack. But if you go for some of their more interesting and different varieties, you get some real winners. Moving to our second last, the penultimate. This is the Glenfarclas 15-year-old. Glenfarclas rarely miss a beat with their whiskies. They don't have that many varieties. They generally wait till something's right, bottle it, and then try to get it that way every time. This is one of their more entry-level varieties, only 15 years, and for them that's quite young. But they've done something special with it. On the nose, lots of sherry, lots of dried fruits and candied fruits, raisins, sultanas, dates. And combined with that small scent of the alcohol and the ethers coming off it, it's basically like having a Christmas cake in a glass. And on the palate, just the same. Real buttery to the palate. The actual viscosity of the whiskey is noticeably thicker than lighter ones. And you get a lot of that sherry. Tastes strongly like a Pedro Jimenez sherry, those sickly sweet ones. And the dried fruit is certainly becoming much more the candied fruit, more the raisins. Raisins and sultanas, definitely. A very good whiskey. Glenfarclas, as I say, don't have that many, but they always aim for the whiskies that have a high impact in some particular area of the flavour they're looking for. This one, the 15, all about the sherry, and it's what we might describe as one of the classic sherry bomb whiskies, because you drink it and it's just like you can tell the sherry that was left in the cask when they put the whiskey in has just mixed and married with it to create one of the most sherry whiskies. And a really good strong finish. Nothing really drops away. Before I had that last sip, from the one before, it was all still there. That same fruitiness and butteriness, and the viscosity would help with a finish. A thicker whiskey will hang around for longer because it coats your mouth and stays there. And that will help us segue beautifully to our final one, leaving that sherry in your mouth, to the Lefroy quarter cask. Now this is a peaty whiskey. If you think you don't like peat, give it a go in our tasting flight, because particularly the flavours that we've chosen to lead into this might change your mind, but also quarter cask has an interesting element to it. It's aged like a normal Lefroy, like a Lafroig 10, one of their entry-level varieties, but it's finished in a quarter cask. And what that means is the smaller cask on the finish gives the whiskey in that cask more exposure to the wood. And from that, that's where it draws up 70% of its flavour. But the fact that it's only finished in it means that it hasn't had that intense flavour exposure for so long that makes it a really hard hit. So the Freud quarter cask is actually quite easy to drink and lighter in terms of its sort of underlying flavour, but what the quarter cask has given it is that intense flavour just to mix in that comes through. Here on the nose, it's all Lafroig. If you've ever smelled a Lafroig and know what it smells like, this is unmistakably that. But through it and through that the Lafroig smoke comes a lot of sweetness. A very sort of sugary sweet, actual sugar, like refined sugar, that goes really well with the peat and sort of softens that intense peat you might get if it wasn't there. And on the palate, a really interesting thing happens. It layers, and so you can tell, particularly in some parts of your mouth, that there's a lot of peat taste, but under that you can definitely taste certainly a bit of peach or other like stone fruits, certainly a little bit of caramelized sugar, so that refined sugar from the nose certainly is turned into a bit more of a caramelized sugar on the palate. But what that does together is it makes that peat really, really nice when contrasted with the sweetness. And a massive finish. I hardly needed to have that last sip because it was all still there from the first one. And you'll get that a lot with peaty whiskies because of their intensity and how much they contribute to the overall taste and how dominating peat can be. It will usually dominate the finish as well. In this case though, because of the quarter cask element, the peat is dropping away slightly quicker than you'd usually expect with a Lafroig, and you've got real sweetness remaining on the finish as well. Well, that's it for the first sample pack. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you enjoyed the whiskies we chose. As I said, we try to make them work with each other, and the flavours lead into the next whiskey. If you liked it, jump on the website and buy a pack if you haven't already. You can drink along again with the video at home, or you can drink without listening to me waffle on. And if you like this one and have got the pack already, definitely look out for our second pack. Until then, Slanja.